This is Jewish Spotlight, a weekly television program presented by Chabad Lubavitch of Long Island, featuring various aspects of modern Jewish life and Jewish culture. Now, here is your host, Rabbi Tuvia Teldin.
Shalom, welcome to the Jewish Spotlight. We have an exciting holiday coming up, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. It's the holiday of Passover. And of course, on Passover, we have many different customs to celebrate the liberation that the Jewish people had in the exodus we experienced from Egypt thousands and thousands of years ago. And on the night of Passover, as millions of Jews from around the world congregate and get together with their families, what do? We sit by a Seder table, where we go through a certain order called the Haggadah, in order to be able to read about the history of our people and to renew our commitment to Jewish values and Jewish traditions and mitzvot. Well, everybody there knows that one of the most popular parts of the reading of the Haggadah is the part where we get to the 4 glasses of wine. And then the 5th glass of wine also, which is the cup of Elijah. And wine has a certain special meaning in Judaism, as it does in many other traditions. But in Judaism, especially for Passover, it's something that we want to really get the best wine possible. And I'll tell you, years and years ago, before kosher wines became the type of wines that they are today, I used to have a very heavy malaga, year after year after year. And eventually, by the time I got to the 4th cup, and those cups are big cups, believe me, I was having a rough time getting through the end of the Seder. Until one year, I noticed that there was a new brand that was out in the market. And there was a person who made that wine who, in fact, I went to school with. And I was very happy to buy his wine to find out what kind of wine this guy makes. Sure enough, it made my Passover Seder very different. And I'm happy to have him on board today because we want to show you not only how wine is made, but what wine's all about and why we make such a big thing of wine, not only for Passover, but for the Sabbath and for the holidays and for many other special and joyous occasions. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our guest, Mr. Joseph Zakon. Mr. Zakon, pleasure to have you on board.
Thank you, Rabbi Teldin, and it's a pleasure to be here.
All right, we're looking forward to learning all about wine. And first, I want to learn a little about you. I mean, we went to school together for, I guess, a year maybe, but I never got to do an interview like this. So I want to know, I heard stories about how you got involved with being a winemaker, which, from what I understand, are very interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about that story and what interested you about wine?
My first interest in wine was really when I was a teenager, or even before that, if I can remember correctly. And that is, I was questioning, like you explained, that you were drinking the 4 cups for Pesach with that extra heavy malaga, and unfortunately we didn't feel good after we drank that wine. And as we know, wine is a very honorable drink, something that we drink for special occasions, holidays. It's a drink that says that our rabbis taught us in school that, you know, it's something that you use for, that's supposed to be very noble and very tasty and very well. And here we're drinking the wine, whether it's the 4 cups of Pesach or even just making the blessing on Shabbos, you know, you're drinking 1 cup of that wine, and we didn't feel exactly excited about drinking that wine.
You weren't spiritually elevated.
So I asked myself a question.
Right.
Is it, did the rabbis tell us the truth? Or just that, you know, Jews don't know how to make wine? And I started researching the subject, and in my research I found out that before the destruction of the temple, Jews were living in the land of Israel. They all owned vineyards and they all knew how to make wine.
This is going back 2,000 years ago.
Correct. And then after the destruction of the temple and the Jews went into diaspora and they were moving around from country to country, they really never had an opportunity of growing grapes and making wine. And that, you know, and the art of winemaking was practically getting lost by the Jewish people. But where did this malaga come along from, I asked myself. And then, you know, after we had, you know, the major immigration to America, and here on the East Coast, the only grape that was growing was really a Concord grape, because malaga is a Spanish name, which is a Spanish grape. And malaga doesn't grow here on the East Coast, it grows in Spain. But for some reason, people here decided to call wines that are made here similar to names that were called in Europe. And this Concord grape wasn't exactly a grape that allowed itself to be made into a dry, not sweet wine. So what they would do is add a lot of sugar to it to mask up the taste. But again, when you have high alcohol and sugar in a wine that tastes like grape jelly, it's kind of difficult to digest. I mean, and that's the reason why we weren't enjoying it as much. But again,
so what did you do?
So
You
my
went out-
research went into finding out what grapes, what's the concept of making wine involved, how we make wine, how wine was made in the old country. And I started studying it and researching it. And I went to the library, matter of fact, at first, and started studying. I mean, I spent days just in the public library studying all I can on the subject of wine. And then I was fortunate enough to have a teacher who I met and I communicated with, who taught me a lot of the different ideas and the chemistry and that's involved in the winemaking. And basically, hands-on experience taught me that we don't need to add all that sugar to make a wine palatable. If it's done right and with care and with devotion, you can make a very nice wine and not add all that sugar.
So how old were you when you came out with your first wine?
Well, I first made...
Not as a business, just on a personal
The first time I
basis.
made my homemade wine was in 1977,
Mhm.
and I was at home, I was making it, and I remember I burnt out my mother's blender and I really didn't know what I was doing, was trying to get hands-on experience before reading even about it.
Okay.
And then the following year, I already had enough experience and I was able to make at-home wine. And that's really, and the other nice part about it was that my rabbi, he appreciated the fact that I was making the wine at home and asked if I could make some wine for him as well. And then word got out that I've been making wine at home, so people were asking if I can make wine for them. And realizing that, it's just very difficult for me to stand and make wine for everyone and everything. In 1981, I decided I'm going to get a license and start a winery. And in 1981, I was most probably the youngest person in the United States to own a bonded winery.
How old were you then?
22.
So I remember when you first started off,
Mhm.
I think it was Governor Cuomo who said that your wine was great. You were on
And
CNN, you were in newspapers,
What happened
and
was,
magazines.
once I had my bonded winery, I nurtured the wines into professional competitions, major competitions, and one of the like state Governor's Cup competition, which was Governor Cuomo was at that time the governor, and I won a gold medal then on 2 wines, and it was like everyone was kind of surprised. Matter of fact, at that time I also made a Chardonnay from grapes grown on Long Island. Now, Eastern Long Island today is a very prestigious grape growing area,
Right.
viticulture area, where you have some of the most prestigious wineries on the East Coast. Back in 1983, there were very few wineries, and I was kind of a pioneer in taking those grapes and making wines. And the kosher palate wasn't even accustomed yet to the Chardonnay in 1983, believe it or not. And I sold most of that wine to the River Cafe, a non-kosher restaurant. They put it on their wine list. They said, "This is beautiful, and it's made right here in our backyard." That's really where the roots. It's all started. I coined the phrase for Brooklyn, the West End of Long Island. Geographically, it is the West End of Long Island, and that's if you look at the labels, you
all
can
your
see.
labels say that
Yes,
the wine is from the
right.
West End of Long Island. So you started off on your own. You built up a business, and can you for us? And I hate to admit this in such a public forum, but I'm really not a wine connoisseur. I guess that's what you would call it. So I don't know all these different names and all these different meanings of wines, Chardonnay and so forth and so on. Can you give me a little, like a 1-minute intro course on what all these names mean?
In 3 words,
Yes.
if you like it, it's great.
Okay.
Don't ever let any winemaker or wine connoisseur or wine expert intimidate you in telling you this wine is great, this wine is bad. To his palate,
Everybody has their own taste.
absolutely.
And all the different
absolutely.
names
And
are
you-
different types of grapes?
Correct.
That's all they are.
They're different blends as well. We can take different grapes and create different wines. For example, I have a wine called Mellow Red, which is a French hybrid, but it's a blend of 3 different grapes from the Finger Lakes region that is grown there. And it's a very interesting red table wine. Again, then you have Concord grape wine, which everyone is very familiar with,
Right.
for the fact that it's not as heavy and sweet like the old traditional Concord. It's basically you taste the grape when you drink that wine, and that's made 100% out of the Concord grape.
Gotcha. Now, in your research, did you find the answers to why wine is so important in Judaism? We make Kiddush, the sanctification of the day of the Sabbath, of course. We conclude the Sabbath with a special Havdalah service over wine. We introduce the holidays with that. We have the 4 cups of wine on Passover. We say a special bracha for wine that we don't say in any other food. Of course, there are many different food categories.
Well, you find the answer in Psalms. King David said it. Wine gladdens the heart of man. And, I mean, that says it's a very honorable and prestigious, precious commodity.
So what is kosher wine then? Why is kosher wine so special?
The question really, let me rephrase, is if it's a natural product and it's all it is grapes, which is, you crush the grapes and you let it sit and ferment and it becomes wine. The job of the winemaker is not to spoil it. Contrary to people think that the winemaker is going to make a great wine, the job is not, is not to spoil it and to let the grapes become wine. So what makes a wine, kosher wine, different than a non-kosher wine? Technically, it's the same thing. The difference is only that the whole process of kosher winemaking is something that goes back to the beginning of time when the whole world was worshipping idolatry. The Jewish people were the only one that said, we cannot worship idolatry, we believe only in God. And
but Abraham was a monotheist and he didn't want to have anything to do with any idols.
And since wine was such a precious commodity in those times, especially in the beginning of time, it was known as a fact that if a non-Jewish person came in contact with a wine, his first thoughts for that wine was for his idolatry. And anything that had anything to do with idolatry for the Jewish person was non-kosher. Then, as idolatry became abolished and doesn't exist today, it was an extension of the rabbinical laws of kosher to try to keep the wine, kosher wine, to keep wine, kosher wine, separate than non-kosher wine, to try to prevent intermarriage, or and that's really the.
So really, the wine itself is, for all practical purposes, the same type of wine made from the same type of process with the same chemicals or processes.
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing you have to make sure is that if for, let's say, you're going to sometimes add a yeast or something, make sure that's you want to make sure it's a kosher yeast that you're using, and it's not something that's not kosher.
Question: you brought along a very interesting video which has a little bit of the progress of what's going on, and we're going to go in and out of that video during the course of the next few minutes just to give our viewers a little bit of a view of it. But maybe you could give us a little bit of your own explanation of what is the process of making this kosher wine from the grape, or I guess from the vineyard, all the way through to the end. And you can give a talking dialogue while we put in some views of what's on the video.
Well, like I said, the most important ingredient of the wine are the grapes. It's really up to the grape.
That much I know.
Grower, the vineyard, and also nature, God, that we have a good vintage.
Right.
Because if we don't have a good vintage, the winemaker has many tricks, but it still won't be a great wine. And when we have good grapes, we will sometimes go out there and hand-pick those grapes and check them and make sure that these grapes, there's no mold, there's no rot, and handle them literally by hand. But those are for special lots, special types of wine. Here in the video, you could also see the way we took some specially selected grapes and we hand-picked them and we put them through a special small crusher, which I did as a separate lot of wine. But the process is fairly simple and yet very complicated. The idea is once you crush the grapes, usually there are wild yeasts around, or yeasts, or if you want, you can add, buy special yeast and add. That will take that sweet juice and start fermenting it. The sweet juice will ferment anywhere from 3 days, you can have it, or to 3 weeks, or to 3 months, depending on the type or style of wine you want to make, and will turn into alcohol. Now, there's certain sweet wines that I like to make that I find people like sweet wine when they like sweet wines. Is we do a very slow, cold fermentation, and that takes very long. And for that keeps captures during the fermentation the flavor of the grape. And it also allows me to be able to stop the fermentation at a predicted alcohol level, and yet the wine will remain sweet and not be overly intoxicating or very high in alcohol. That's really the basic process. I mean, and then, there are many other steps. You want to chill it, and you make sure that it's heat stable and cold stable. But those are all technical terms, which I don't think at the moment.
Right, we don't need to go into. So you have a factory in West Long Island.
West End of Long Island, which is Brooklyn, New York.
Very
yes, and I'm looking to expand, as a matter of fact.
Now, you mentioned also before the show that you went to Russia in 1992.
In 1992, after the fall of communism, which was in 1990, there's a community in one of the former Soviet republics called Moldova. And over there, it's a big grape-growing region, and the Jewish people over there asked me if I can come out and help them make some wine, and just, for them. So I remember I came out there, and although I did graduate as a rabbi, and you can call me, I can be a rabbi, but this is not I don't practice being a rabbi. I'm practicing making the wine. I even had a special rabbi come out from France just to help me, make the processing plant, the winery that was used for non-kosher wine all those years, to make them, kosher and to help,
What do you have to do to transform a non-kosher winery into a kosher winery?
Well, you have to kosherize all the tanks. That in itself is a tremendous job, especially when we're dealing.
You have to heat them up to a certain level so that they're considered to be kosher.
That's if it's possible to do that. But most of these tanks are so huge. I mean, we're talking 10,000 gallon tanks minimum, and those are the small ones.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really heat up a 10,000 gallon tank unless it's specially built that way, and they're not built to be heated up. So the process of koshering tanks is you have to fill them up with water for 3 24-hour periods of time. Each 24-hour period, spill out the water and pour in new water, and that's using a lot of water, and it takes time to do that. So that's part of the process. Then you have the lines that have to be rinsed down and washed down. Some of them with hot water, some of them with cold water.
So it's a big
but
process.
I just I wanted to make sure that everything was 100% kosher, since there weren't too many rabbis in Russia at that time yet. Today there are a lot of rabbis in Russia, and I wanted
But that must
to
have
have
been
the
a
rabbi
fascinating experience for you.
Oh, absolutely! It was very interesting. It was an experience that will be with me forever. A lot of interesting moments. I mean, I've never seen people work the way they've been working there. I mean, it was all.
I mean, the conditions they work under.
The conditions, and I mean,
which probably are still existent.
I mean, you're telling me about heating up a tank. I mean, I saw one of the people working in the winery, and here it would be totally OSHA. I mean, illegal. I mean, he's holding a pipe that was 180 degrees almost with one bare hand, and just spraying, cleaning down a tank, and it was like, it was really like, it was an experience, but thank God we were able to make some wine for them, and they enjoyed it.
Now, is that winery still functioning?
Oh, yes, it is, but they didn't make, we made it one time. The problem there was, which I didn't realize in the beginning, is it's very difficult to deal with the farmers to get the grapes that we need. And that's, but again, I got a phone call this past year. They would like to make wine again in Ukraine, which is right next door to Moldova. And I told them, make sure that we can have grapes. If you can get grapes, you can get contracts that are reliable. Definitely, that would be something that would definitely help out the Jewish people in Russia, instead of us having to ship them wine, which we do all the time, either here or from Israel, for them to have wine there. Right. They can make their own kosher wine.
Interesting. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Passover Seder itself. Passover is coming, and of course, people want to go out, they want to get good wine, they want to make sure they have plenty of it. Of course, it's important, which is important to mention, to have wine for the 4 cups and not just grape juice, because grape juice fulfills the mitzvah to a certain degree, but not as much as, of course, the drinking of wine. So that's number one. And of course, there's a certain minimum that people should drink during the course of the Seder itself. It shouldn't be just a little shot glass, and at the same time, doesn't have to be a 7-ounce glass. It should be a minimum of about 3.5 ounces, I believe, to be qualified for being a glass of wine. That would mean a person would have to drink the whole amount of wine in order for that amount to be fulfilling the mitzvah of each of the cups. And then, of course, we have the cup of Elijah. You want to tell us a little bit about that cup?
Well, before we get to that cup, I would just like to mention to you that the reason why we drink 4 cups of wine on Passover is for the 4 types of redemption that we have, and each cup symbolizes another redemption that we went through during the time that we left Egypt. The cup of Elijah is more of symbolism type of situation, where it just wants to bring us and show us, that there's always the angel who's watching over us and who's there with us in all, during all periods and during all times, whether good or God forbid bad.
And it also symbolizes the future redemption.
That's why after we finish, the last thing we say in the Haggadah is Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim, which we hope that
next year will be in Jerusalem, together with Mashiach, with the temple we built.
Exactly, and when the temple will be built, we'll be using a lot of wine in the temple, because one of the mainstays of the temple is to pour wine on the altar. So
you're looking for developing some business over there, huh?
Well, I'll try to use your connections. I think you're well connected for that.
Okay, so we have the 4 cups, and we make a blessing on each of the cups, of course, during the Seder plate, which is a whole explanation of itself, why we repeat the same blessing over and over again when we're drinking the same drink over. But we won't get into that right now. And then we have the cup of Elijah. Now, Elijah, of course, who is a great prophet, who we consider visits every single Passover Seder all over the world. Now, of course, in a physical terminology, that would be a total impossibility. But for my children, I don't know what you do in your house, but in my house, what we do is, and my children are suspicious of me until they get to be 9 or 10 years old, and then they figure it out. We have the cup of Elijah, and it's filled up all the way to the top. And I figured out the name. You probably know this name, hibiscus. That little curve on the top of a cup is called, I think, the hibiscus or something.
Yeah.
And we go out to the door, and of course, we open the front door of the house to see if Elijah is coming, or at least let him in. And I usually just tap the table from the bottom with my knee like this, just so that some of the wine falls off the top, so that the kids see that it's falling off and they really think Elijah is there. What can I tell you? That's our family custom.
Well, as a child, I always thought that Elijah really came and drank the wine out of the cup. And I think my children also think that, and I don't bang the table.
Well, what happens? What do you mean, the cup?
I don't know.
You
I have a special cup. I have a little hole in the bottom that releases it.
That's your special load. You make a special delivery of wine.
No, but the nicest thing is after, when they come out, they go out, they usually take the candles and walk to the door to greet Elijah.
Right.
And after this, after we say Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim, we usually sing a special song at home and we pour the wine back into the bottle. And that was really one of the nice finales of the Seder, and we would make Kiddush on that wine the following day.
I have a feeling, though, in your house, that Passover Seder, especially the conclusion of the Passover Seder, has a special symbolism that it doesn't have for anybody else. That means that we're going to have our daddy back. Because before Passover, they probably don't see you for about 4 months.
Well, yes, I mean, it is very busy, and I agree, but I must say that it comes Pesach, and when you meet your friends in shul afterwards, and you speak to the people afterwards, and they thank you, and you see how much they appreciate, being able to drink the wine for Pesach, and one of my slogans was, when I came out with a wine called Eminent Dry Passover wine, was how to keep your cup after the 4 cups.
Your cup meaning in Yiddish language means ahead.
In other words, you didn't get overly intoxicated after you drank the 4 cups of wine.
Right.
Because this was a special wine that I formulated, which was, no matter how the grapes come to me from the vineyard, and I try out my best, and I literally pay the farmers, the growers, an extra few dollars to grow them specially for me, to try to get them as high in sugar content as possible, the sweetness of them, because that also reduces the acidity, which makes them more mellow. But that's the criteria of this wine is 7% alcohol, and it stops. According to the law, any wine that's under 7% alcohol is not considered a wine in the United States. It's considered a wine product. And we want the wine to be considered a wine. So at 7% alcohol, the refrigerator on the wine tank goes full blast to stop the fermentation right there. And that's really, the whole purpose of it was for Passover. And if you'll see the label, it's also the background is a matzah. And it's not a very sweet wine, but it's a very nice and wonderful wine to drink when it comes to the 4 cups, especially when you want to be able to sit through the Seder and be able to answer your children coherently when they ask questions. And, I don't know, but I know Erev Pesach, it's very hurried and busy time, and the father is usually busy with a million things, everything last minute, and we forget, and then we got to prepare the mar. And you're literally exhausted when you sit down by the table. And all you need is 2 cups of wine that are, 12% alcohol, and forget. I mean, it's a struggle to continue.
Definitely. Well, listen, I think we have to get to the most important part of the show. I want to taste some of this, and let's see over here. Why don't you take the red, and I'll take the white?
Sure.
Okay. All right. This is your...
this is my Niagara Blanc,
white,
which is the grape it's made from is called Niagara.
All right.
It's a grape grown in the Finger Lakes region. It's it's like the counterpart to the Concord grape, which is a lot more famous than the Niagara, but it's in a white grape, which is why it's a white wine. A red wine we make out of red grapes, and the color usually is from the skin of the grapes, and we ferment it on the skins. Whereas a white grape. This particular wine that I'm drinking is the Mellow Red that I mentioned before, which is a blend of 3 different grapes from the Finger Lakes they're French hybrids grown in the Finger Lakes region.
All right, now we're going to make a bracha, special blessing beforehand. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pri hagafen.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pri hagafen.
Amen. I always enjoy your wine.
Thank you.
All right, I can continue this for a while, but I don't think I'm going to bore everybody with watching me drink wine. But in the meantime, I want to mention also, wine has some other special symbolisms in Judaism. Because what do? You take a grape, which is a very small little fruit, very humble, small little fruit, and you reveal something that is potentially hidden within it that you can't tell by looking at the surface. And this, I think, is also one of the reasons why it's so special, is because we, as human beings, as Jews, we have a custom to try to always bring out the most hidden potential from things that we find in life. And wine, when we drink it, we're really drinking the end product of something that has been fine-tuned and taken to the point where it's really been elevated to its fullest potential. And that's what we want to do in life also. That's what we want to do with our children, with our lives, when we have a Passover Seder, when we enjoy the Sabbath, when we observe our mitzvot, the commandments of God, and we do anything in life. It could be in business, it could be in any walk of life at all. We want to always elevate something to its highest degree, to its highest state of purity. And this, in fact, is part of our challenge as Jewish people, is tikkun olam, to fix the world. And I must say that you do a good job of fixing the world. Taking all those millions and millions of grapes out there and elevating them to reveal their greatest potential. It's a true gift. And for this, I had to say l'chaim, to life, to life. And I want to thank you very much for being on the show, Mrs. Zakan. It's been a pleasure. And I hope that you should continue to make good wine for people to be able to say l'chaim, to life.
Thank you, l'chaim, and thank you. And good luck to you. And you should have a lot of success in your work, in your outreach work. And you should help us in bringing the ultimate redemption now.
That's right. In fact, on many of your bottles of wine, I noticed that you say also that in the times of Mashiach, when Mashiach comes, that wine will also have a special meaning, not only for the temple, but Mashiach himself will drink from a special goblet and be able to say l'chaim for all of Jews. So we're going to conclude now by telling you that everybody out there, whether you like wine, don't like wine, make sure you do something in any case to be able to elevate your world and to find the hidden potential within everything in your life, to make sure that you do what you can to make this world a better place, because really that's what we're here to do. And of course, our friend Mr. Zakan does it by refining all of his grapes. We do it by many other ways, each and every single one of us in a unique way. And that's what makes the life so interesting and the world so beautiful. So in the meantime, go out there and do a mitzvah, make the world a better place, and shalom from both of us. Take care, and it's been a pleasure having you on board.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon. Take care. Shalom.
Mashiach, Sis, Simchu, Besimcha, Sagiulo, Hine